We have just a few more weeks remaining in this series. In some ways, I was just saying this to my wife last night before but I don't know if I'm good enough to preach this. This is an amazing but complex portion of Scripture text, but incredibly important. Incredibly important. And this week and the next 2 weeks, I'm going to try to unpack these verses and then the next set of verses right afterwards about the nature of the glory of the resurrection body. What does that look like? The glory of the resurrection you. We're not talking about more than just a physical body. We're talking about the whole you. What you will be. What you will be. And so I'm going to try to unpack this over the next 3 weeks, and then we'll close out this series on the last Sunday of the month. But let's get into it. In my message today, entitled "Beyond the Kernel to Your Glorious Self," that's what the Scripture says. That what we sow is not the body, but a bare kernel. Right? Beyond the body, beyond the kernel, to your glorious self. So 3 parts. Part 1, the kernel of you now. Okay, that's how the Scripture describes what we are now. We're like a seed. We're like a kernel. That's this life that we have now. That's what this is. The kernel of you now. That's part 1. Part 2, the fullest glorious you yet to come. That's what the resurrection is. There's a whole new you, which is really you. And that's what's yet to come. And then part 3, the salt of Christ and the truest you. The salt of Christ and the truest you. Let's get into I want to read verse 37. Let's get to verse 37. And so, if we back up just a little bit before verse 37. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. Verse 37. And what you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel. This is the part that I want to unpack today. A bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or of some other grain. But God gives it a body as He has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. All right, so let me just stop there. I'm going to unpack this thing about the seed and then a body. It's just follow me. You have to read this multiple. I've read this a lot of different times. And what is Paul saying here in this passage? He's basically saying the life that we sow is really just a seed. It's just a kernel of the real life that is yet to come, which is actually the body. That's what he calls it. Okay, so there's a seed, and then there'll be a body, the real body, that is the real body, which is another way of saying the real fullness of your life that is yet to come. Now, let's just stop, and I want you to think deeply about this. Most of us do not think of life this way. It's very important that you think about that. That you take this very, very seriously. Most of us, what we see and experience and feel, this is my life. In fact, most of us feel like this is all there is. You know, how strong you are, how smart you are, how tall you are, how pretty you are, how rich you are, how talented you are. This is all of your life. And Paul says that this life that we have now, this natural life, this is just like a seed. That's all it is. We're sowing this thing, and all it is a kernel. It's like a seed. Now, you guys understand what a kernel? A kernel is not even the whole seed. A kernel is the part inside the seed that has the life. A whole seed has like a husk. There's something. There's like a cover to it, and then there's a kernel, which is the part inside the seed, and then that goes into the ground. And then the seed itself actually dies, and then the part that's alive in there, called the kernel, this new thing starts to emerge out of it, a plant, right? Now, a plant or a tree. So take this is the metaphor, this is the picture that Paul is using to give us the real reality that we're going to experience when it comes to the resurrection. This life that we have now is just like a seed. Now think about a seed. A seed is nothing like the actual amazing tree that's going to come out of it. If you think of a seed, that's all it is. It's not, and a kernel is even less than that. You don't even see the kernel. The life inside the seed is even less. It's smaller. But what does it look like when it is fully grown? There's a seed, and then while I was prepping this, I was thinking of an apple tree, because we have this wild apple tree in the back, of my house, which we don't water. We do nothing to this thing, and this thing just grows. These just branches are just shooting out of it, and just apples are coming off. So if you like apples, we'll give you ours, okay? And it's a glorious tree in our backyard. And think of that tree compared to a seed. Does the seed look anything like the tree? Think about that. You have this incredible tree, and then you have a seed. The seed, compared to the tree, practically looks like nothing, right? Or, if we go to Bishop, we usually go, in the summer, we're going to go through Yosemite National Park. And the seed is like an acorn, and this mighty tree literally, it can even break rock. It breaks the rock, and this isn't even a theory. You have like a little acorn, and it goes, and the acorn or the seed or whatever it is, and this incredibly mighty tree breaks right out of the rock. And yet, that seed, even though it looks nothing like the full-grown, incredible, glorious tree, that seed and the tree are absolutely linked, right? The true life comes from that seed. But here's what Paul is trying to, and this is the part I'm trying to get across to you today. Everything that you consider of your life now, the whole totality of your life, this body that you have and all this, it's just a seed. That's all it is. That's all you got. This is just a seed. The real you and the real life of you that is yet to come is something more like a mighty tree, or like the glorious apple tree. That's the real glory that is yet to come in the resurrection, and yet it has to come from someplace. It comes from who you are now. Who you are now is like this tiny little seed. Inside of it's a kernel, and that actually has to die first. There's all these parts of your life that has to die out. But there's a part in you that's really the living part. That's the kernel. That's the part connected to Jesus. And after you die, that's like your seed has died, your life, which is the seed, the kernel, has died. And then this incredible mighty oak or an apple tree, which is really who you really are, that's going to come out. Okay, now that's really what the passage is saying. Now, I want to say one other part about this. It has this little strange part that talks about all these different, not all the flesh is the same. There are heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies. So the earthly body is like the seed. The heavenly body is like the oak tree. See it? But the glory of the heavenly is one kind and the glory of the earthly is of another kind. Our eyes are only fixated on the glory of the earthly. We're in the middle, the NBA basketball finals has just started. It's super exciting. That's the glory of the earthly. This guy named Kevin Durant, or number 35 and number 30, Stephen Curry. They're glorious players, two of the greatest players that's ever played, and yet but think of the way Paul thinks it. That's all, it's just a seed. Think of how small the glory. Did any of you ever take a look at it and say, "Oh, this is so glorious"? You take a seed and you're like, "Oh," nobody goes and stares at seed. We do look at a mighty tree. There are people literally around the world that will go. They go to the redwood forest just to look at that magnificent thing called the tree. That's of a different kind of glory. But nobody goes and stares at a little seed. And yet, if you look at this life all you're doing is you're just staring at that little seed. You're like, oh, this is so glorious. That's how beautiful that is to us. And yet, what is to come, it's like nothing compared to what is to come. But the other part I want to make is this, and then he goes on to say, there is one glory of the sun, and another of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for stars differ from star in glory. You know what he's saying there? Some of us are like the moon, and some of us are like the sun, and yet each of us are like stars, and every star has its own special glory. That's what this part he's saying. So, if each of us are a seed, some of us will grow to be a mighty oak tree, and some of us will be a beautiful apple tree. Some of us might be a beautiful pear tree. You get the metaphor? Each of us will have a glory that fits the seed. The seed, you have to have an apple seed, and then you get a beautiful apple tree. You have to have a redwood seed, then you get this. You can't get this supremely. I mean, some of you will consider an apple tree more beautiful, and some of you will consider the redwood. Most of us probably consider a redwood like so much more glorious than probably a nice apple tree. But at least you get apples out of an apple tree, right? But whether you're talking about the absolutely magnificent redwood or an apple tree, the seed is. You got to have the seed. All of us are like this raw material seed for something like that. And guess what? And it's all different from each other. And this is interesting too. Even an apple tree is different from another apple tree. Isn't that interesting? So one apple tree is maybe stout and produces one kind of apple. But another is it may be very tall and it produces a different kind of. They're both similar, but they're not the same. And each one's glory is different. That's what he's saying. That's how tremendously important who you are. Who you are. You're a very specific seed intended to produce a very specific glory, which we don't yet see yet. But that's what's coming. Now let me make a second point before I go to the second part of my message. Can you see this? Can you see this? When you look at your life, can you see a potential apple tree or a mighty redwood tree in your life? Do you see it? Or is your eyes stuck on just looking at seed? Seed life. Seed glory, that's all you see. Which seed glory, understand, is not even any glory. The biggest glory we have here in this earthly body, this earthly life, is like staring at seeds. Can you see it? I want to make a point that's very important for the spiritual life. Your ability to envision something that you can't literally see with your eyes is very, very important to your spiritual life. I've been a pastor for a lot of years now, and I have found that the ability of different people to use their imagination, because that's what it takes. It's your imagination that allows you to see something that you don't actually see. You get what I'm saying? Your physical eyes see something. I can see you here, but to see, I'm looking at a seed. I'm looking at a seed. Who you are, I'm seeing a seed. But one day, when I look at you, can I see the redwood? So we don't actually see the redwood, but it takes a certain imagination to look at a person, and they're just a seed, but you can see incredible. Some people can do this. Some people go to their backyard, and everybody else just sees a bunch of weeds and dirt. Then they look at that seed, and for everybody else, they just see, well, a little thing called a seed. And it's nothing interesting at all. In fact, it's really boring. But some people can look at that thing and they can actually picture an amazing tree in their backyard where all kinds of they can actually envision that fruit coming off that tree. They can look at this thing, they can actually look at that seed, and they can envision it with their imagination. They look at that backyard and they don't see just a bare, empty nothing. They look at that seed and they see this glorious tree. Can you do that? Can you do that? And do that in your life and other people's lives. Can you do that? Let me say this point. If you're not any good at that, you won't have spiritual power in your life. You have to at least begin to start. So some are like, oh my goodness, I'm really terrible at this. I have like no imagination, Pastor. Then start. We got to start someplace. There was a time in your life when you could not walk. There was a time in your life when you could not read. You had to start. We all have to start. If you have utterly no imagination, no spiritual power to envision, then you have to start someplace. And for you, some of you guys are at maybe a second grade level, and some of you are at the fourth grade. Let me tell you the difference between the really powerful Christians and the weak Christians. The weak Christians are at like kindergarten level or even preschool level. They can barely read. They can do anything. That's where they are at the power of envisioning. But the powerful Christians, they can see the redwood. They see it. They see it. And they know it's real. They don't think it's fake. They don't think it's in their imagination. It's just only in their imagination. Oh, I see it. Oh, that's real. And they know that it's more than any glory that's here. The kernel of your life. Right now, that's all. This life, that's all you got now is like, this is just a bare kernel. Can you imagine that? You're a billionaire. You're a supermodel. You're the MVP of the NBA Finals. You made it to Stanford, and then you went off to Harvard Medical School, and you're the top surgeon in the world, and people like bow down to you. They fly around from all someplace else, and you make $1 million a year, and people worship you, practically worship you, because you have like such power to save people's lives, and that's nothing but a seed. That's what this passage is saying. Can you begin to like wrap your mind around this? This passage is a reality. It's a reality distortion field. What we consider reality is so nothing. What this passage is saying. The actual reality is it's like we're trapped in this like so blinded understanding of reality. That we look at the sea and go, oh, this is so great. But it's not. It's really practically nothing compared to what is being promised. And so that's what these sermons, each of these sermons, I'm going to try to like punch a hole and give you power to have spiritual imagination and see something. And we have to practice. Let me go to part 2. The fullest glorious you yet to come. The fullest glorious you yet to come. It's actually easier to do this. You have to be able to look at who you are and imagine that you're not just going to be just this. I mean, I know a lot of you guys think I'm so handsome and so smart. All right? But this handsome and smart is just a seed. It's actually not much. But actually, handsome and smart is not even much. That's probably part of the husk. It's not even part of the life. You know what's the part of the kernel that lives? It's probably more like humility and holiness and love and righteousness. Peace, joy, patience, kindness. These are the things that and most of us have very little of those things, including me, okay? We're very poor in those things. Handsome and smart. I mean, like, that's the stuff that's just got to die out, actually. It does. I mean, it starts to die out even before we die. You get older and you can't remember stuff. Your brain power actually starts to diminish. And of course we don't look as good, as we get older too. So even that's dying. It's already dying. That's the husk. It's not even the kernel. The part that's alive. But holiness can grow. And it's the real person that you're going to be, that real incredible person that you're going to be, that is sort of like, that's a glimpse. That's a shard of, it's like a little shard of light that's coming in from eternity, and you can see it in the person. Now, most of us probably can't see this in ourselves. It's hard to see it in yourself. And it's probably good that you're not looking for it in yourself, because most of us are so poisoned by pride that we'll get like very self-centered about it. It's easier to see it in other people. And if you can begin to see this drama in other people, now you're actually in the real world. Now you're actually, it's weird because we're so blind, you use a spiritual imagination to see reality. And if you could do this, you're starting to see this glorious being. There's a place where C.S. Lewis says that if you can see what a person is going to become, you would want to worship that person. I mean, we worship Steph Curry now for his basketball skills, as we're going through this week, during the NBA Finals. But if you could just worship the average, seemingly boring Christian person, and you would look at that person, we would want to bow down to that person. That's what Lewis says. That's what we're talking about here. It's the difference between mighty redwood and like nothing. Seed. Now, when you see this person, when you get a glimpse, it's sort of like you watch them, there's a difference between the trailer, the sneak preview, and the actual movie. The sneak preview, it's like a 2-minute, it's like a 30-second thing. And then they have that special music. It's going to be this exciting movie, and really, it's sort of like whets your appetite for the real thing. All we get here is that. If you have faith, you just get little trailers, little sneak previews of the glory that is to come. But it's really important to look for that. It's important that your mind can see that. Now, I'm going to give you 3 examples in this second portion to help you begin to see this in your own life. And if you can begin to practice spiritual vision and sight, it'll give you real power in your life. Now, I'll give you 3 examples. The first one, I didn't tell her I was going to say this, but it's about my wife, okay? Sorry, Grace. I'll say sorry to the video. And I'll actually say sorry to the real Grace when she shows up, okay? Sorry, Grace, but let me say this. I don't know if you know this. So my wife is in her early 40s now. And we started dating when she was 21. And I was 24. She was 21 at that time. And she was pretty and she was smart. And what attracted me to her is we were in a Bible study, and she had there was a certain kind of clarity and intensity of her interest in the stuff of the Lord. Okay, and when I hung out with her, she was one of the few people I ever met that I felt like there was utterly no BS. Just a clarity of a person. I was like, that's started what made me be attracted to her. But there's something else I want to tell you about her. I don't know if you know this, but the young version of Grace, she wrestled with bouts of depression. My wife was a melancholic person, and there was one particular date we had, and she didn't seem like herself. She just seemed like a shell of herself. And she was really blue. And there was no explanation. She had this sadness. It was almost like if somebody you almost can imagine if sadness was a sack, she had like 100-pound sack on her back. And sadness was just way. And I was like, what's the matter? I said, what's the matter? What's the matter? She couldn't tell me what was the matter. She said, SooSang, this is who I really am. This is who I really am. I'm like this. You sure you want to be with me? This is who I really am. It was just mysterious to me. I'm getting kind of emotional just thinking about this. And I don't know if it's just because I was dumb or whatever, but it didn't bother me at that time. I was like, nope, it's not going to bother me. It's not actually easy to be married to somebody who has a 100-pound sack of sadness on their back, because that sack of sadness will start coming on you. So this is what my life was like. So I'm not saying, I really did not know how to handle it in a lot of different ways early in our marriage. It's part of what made me a bad husband. But this is what my wife was like. So she wasn't like this all the time. She's like this sometimes, but it's really a part of her. This is a part of the kernel, the seed of grace. Now, let's fast forward. We're about to, we're going toward our 20th wedding anniversary, and there's things in grace that weren't there before. There is beautiful things in grace. So I'm just give you an example. My wife. Okay, so I think after 20 years of spending being married to a person with a sarcastic sense of humor, she kind of has this like edgy, sarcastic sense of humor now, which I love. Okay, since I'm sort of mean, sarcastic sense of humor, I love it when my wife, who's just like one of the sweetest people you will ever meet, when she kind of has like this edgy, sarcastic sense of humor, and mostly she has it only with me. She doesn't like put it out to you guys. Okay, so it's kind of like a secret thing that's like between me and she occasionally puts it on the kids, right? And so there's these things that we have this banter, like I'll do something and she'll go, why did you leave your socks on the, because she knows that, like, she keeps expecting that that I'm not supposed to do that, that if I put my sock there, that will like drive her a little batty. And so I go, well dear, the reason I did that, because I was thinking that I will put my sock there, because if I do this, then it will really drive Grace nuts. That's why I did it. I actually thought about it and did it on purpose. And she goes, I knew it. She goes, I knew it. I know that's exactly what you're doing. And but she says it with like this laughter on her face. And there's like this incredible confident strength in her. And so like we share like this, almost this kind of like fake mean. And when she's like that, I'm like so, I don't know, this sounds so weird. When my wife gets sarcastic like that, I'm like so in love with her. It's like that person with the 100-pound sack of sadness, like that person has like died, and like I'm seeing this powerful person, this powerful, beautiful woman giving me her humor. And it's like amazing. See, that's like a sneak preview. And so I say, I don't know how you guys do it. This is how I do it. I say things like, so when she says something like that, she goes, I knew that's why you put that sock in there. And I just go, you're awesome. I just like you so much. And that's my way of saying, I'm so in love with you. Because, I don't say like really mushy things like, I'm so in love with you. And so since I'm not very articulate, I just talk like a teenager. I just like you so much. See? Here's a second example. There's a woman that I named my daughter after this woman named Beth Kidd. And she runs this ministry called Place of Promise. And Place of Promise ministers to what she calls multiply injured persons. And there was a point in that she's done this for many, many years. It's in the poorest part of Boston. And she once ministered to this person who was a drug addict and was dying from all the sickness that she had picked up. And then she was visiting this person in the hospital, and this person had gotten saved in the Lord. And she was basically saying goodbye to her friend. And right next to her friend was another woman dying. And her friend said to her, Beth, okay, she goes, stop talking to me now. I'm going to go home to Jesus. I'm good. I'm really good. Can you imagine a person saying that while they're dying, after they've like wrecked and destroyed their life? She goes, I'm good. She goes, I'm so joyful. I'm utterly at peace. Now go do what you did for me to her. My roommate totally needs Jesus. Go love her like the way you love me and tell her about Jesus. And Beth took one look at her, and the way Beth describes her is she was an unbelievable, horrid mess. I looked at her arms, and she just had these tracks up and down her arms, and I knew what that meant. That meant like she was a heroin addict. And she goes, I just looked one look at her, and she's just so gross to me, I didn't want to do it. And so her friend said, go do it. And she said, And you know what she said? Inside, she started having this fight with Jesus. No, I don't want to do it. And so her friend is telling her to do it, but inside she's telling Jesus no. She's like, oh no, she's trying to like make up an excuse so she's not do it. But inside she's having this like raging fight with the Lord. I don't want to do it. She said, go over there, go. And so she said, oh. So she like made herself go over there, and she struck up a conversation with this woman who had been a heroin addict who had all these tracks, and she just, I mean, I can't imagine what she must have looked like. Because Beth regularly ministers to people that is a mess, a person that is so much of a mess, that is too much of a mess that Beth wouldn't even want to talk to. I mean, are you kidding? That's how she described her. And she had AIDS. So she was dying in a hospital back then when we didn't have good treatment for AIDS. She struck up this conversation, and that started a relationship. And then she amazingly didn't die in the hospital. She lived on for a couple more years. And this is the way Beth described her. She became one of the most beautiful women of God I'd ever met in my whole life. She became one of my dearest, closest friends and sisters, whom I loved like. And she became one of the most beautiful human beings I'd ever met. And when she died a couple years later, it was the most painful thing I ever went through in my life. That's how she put it. Can you imagine that? She goes, it was so painful after that. She went from the most horrid mess to the most glorious person, and then she died. And that's just kernel. You get it? That's still just seed. It's just like a sneak preview of what is to come. And she was so beautiful. So that's what we all mourn when beauty dies. She was so beautiful. It hurt Beth so badly, she wanted to stop doing ministry. She goes, I can't take that anymore. And then she went into a whole period where she wrestled with Jesus for a long time. Mightily, I can't do this ministry. That's example number 2. Number 3. This one's personal to me. I have a love-hate relationship with my dad. On the one hand, I deeply love him. But there's nobody in my life that has hurt me more profoundly than my dad. And there's nobody that can enrage me like my dad. My dad knows the Lord. Loves the Lord. But there is a chasm between us. Somewhere between his sins and my sins. I know everything that's wonderful about my dad. I also know everything that's terrible about my dad. I'm sure he thinks he knows what is good about me and what is terrible about me. And however many times we get together, it's like, I'm telling you, my dad and I could be doing great. And 30 minutes later, we're on the verge of a serious, serious fight. The kind of fight where if we didn't come back and try to forgive each other because we were both trying to be Christians, that we would just never talk to each other again. That kind of fight. And every now and then I see this little glimpse of the godliness of my dad. Where he has an understanding. He can just let go of the parts of him that I consider petty. And one day I have this dream, which is really not just a dream. It's my spiritual imagination. It's my vision. It's my sneak preview into reality itself. You get it? This is real reality where he and I are going to sit at a table and he's going to listen to my music and drink my beer. And he will get me. And we'll have a closeness we've never had. See? The glorious person that my dad, the redwood tree that my dad will be. And it helps me. It helps me when I see this. To forgive him, to come to a place, maybe realize I probably need to be forgiven. and let's go love him again. All because of this hope that I have of the resurrection through Jesus. Let's go to part 3. The salt of Christ and the truest you. I'm going to close my message by reading from this person. Everything I've told you about how I look at the world this way and look at people, I learned from this guy, C.S. Lewis. I learned it from him. And I'm going to read to you a portion of the end of Mere Christianity. And it's really about how you become you. The real you. Not the kernel seed you. The redwood tree you. The incredible you. Alright? So let me read. To become new men, new people, us, the new one, the real you that is, right? Means losing what we now call ourselves. Out of ourselves into Christ we must go. His will is to become ours, and we are to think his thoughts and have the mind of Christ. And if Christ is one, and if he is then to be in us all, shall we not all exactly, don't we turn out the same? It seems like it, but that's not the case. It is difficult here to give a good illustration, right? But I will try to give you 2 imperfect illustrations, which may give a hint of the truth. Imagine a lot of people who have always lived in the dark. Get it? Imagine a lot of people who have always lived in the dark. They've never had light. You come and try to describe to them what light is like. It's really weird. Can you just try to imagine and describe? That's what I try to do for you every week, by the way. I'm trying to tell people who live in the dark what light is like. No more than any other message I felt that today, okay? You might tell them that if they come into the light, that some light would fall on them all, and they would all reflect it, and thus become what we call visible. So this is what it means to be in Christ. If you come into Christ, you're coming into the light. That's another way the Bible puts it. It is not quite possible that they would imagine, since they were all receiving the same light, and all reacting to it in more or less the same way, that they would all just look alike. They'd all just come out the same way. Right? But you and I know that's absurd. It's absurd. If you come, we're all living in the dark, and then all of a sudden if we shine the light, we will actually see everybody for who they actually are. And they won't look the same at all. The same light is at everybody, but they won't be the same at all. That's what it's going to be like. If you and I know that the light will in fact bring out or show up how different they actually are. Now here's another illustration. Suppose a person who knew nothing about salt. Nothing about salt. You give him a pinch to taste, and he experiences a strong, sharp taste. Like, ooh, you guys have first time ever just take a little pinch of salt and it's like, ooh, right? You then tell him that in your country, people use salt in all their cooking. And he might think, wow, in that case, then I suppose everything tastes the same, doesn't it? Everything tastes the same. It's like, so everything in your country tastes salty? No, no, of course not, right? You'd say, because the taste of the stuff you just have is so strong that it'll kill the taste of everything else, right? But you and I know that the real effect of salt is exactly the opposite. And so far from killing the taste of the egg or of the fish, or of the cabbage, it actually brings it out on its own. They do not show their real taste till you have added the salt, right? And so there are a lot of stuff that tastes really wonderful, but until you put in the salt in, it doesn't taste like much. It is something like that with Christ and us. The more we get what we call ourselves out of the way and let Him take us over, the more truly ourselves we become. There's so much of Him that millions and millions of little Christs all different, will still be too few to express the fullness of him. He made them all. He invented them. And as like an author invents characters, all the different men that you and I were intended to be, in that sense, our real selves are waiting for us in him. That's the resurrection. It is no good trying to be myself without him. The more I resist him and try to live on my own, the more I become dominated by my own heredity and upbringing and surroundings and natural desires. In fact, what I so proudly call myself becomes merely the meeting place for trains and events which I started and which I cannot stop. Let me put it this way. He goes on to say things like this. You think that you're this really clever person, but really all you are, you're just the propaganda that you heard in college. The things that you think you're so smart is just sort of like the stuff that you were brainwashed when you're in college. The things that you think are so cool are just you being manipulated by marketing people. That's what you think is so cool. This is so special. I'm so cool. This is what I love. Actually, you've just been manipulated by marketing people. That's all you are. Or it's just something from your genes. He goes on to say, actually, I, in my natural self, are not nearly so much of a person as I would like to believe. Most of what I call me can be easily explained. Isn't that incredible? We all think we're so special. It is when I turn to Christ, when I give myself up to his person and his personality, that I first begin to have a real person and personality of my own. At the beginning, I said there were personalities in God. I will go further now. There are no real personalities anywhere else. Until you have given up yourself to him, you will not have a real self at all. Sameness is to be found among the most natural men, and not among those who surrender to Christ. How monotonously alike are all the tyrants and all the conquerors have been. How gloriously different are all the saints. You want to become the real you? You need this salt. So we're sort of like this really bland fish. Or this really boring bread. This bread that people would eat and go, it's boring. And yet, if a little salt goes into the dough, or you throw a little salt onto the fish, all of a sudden, it becomes wonderfully tasteful. And Jesus came so that all this husk and stuff would die with him. If you would unite yourself to him, your real self can emerge in the resurrection with him. And as you walk this life, keep taking Christ in, because that's how you're going to feed the kernel that's going to become your real you. Keep taking Christ in, and then like Grace, and then like Beth Kidd, or even like my father, will begin to see the sneak preview of the glorious self, the real person that is yet to come. Let's pray.